Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Progcast. I'm your fearless host, Gregg Bendian, and very happy to be speaking about a very special kind of music today, as we have done throughout the podcast over the last 100 and something episodes. But we do like to really get into talking about the music of Captain Beefheart and his magic band and the protagonists, the chief protagonists who are part of the creation, very much a part of the creation of this iconic music, which we've all come to love over the years. Maybe not in the day was it appreciated the way it is now, but certainly now the recordings that we're going to be talking about, in particular, Trout Mask Replica, include the wonderful guitar playing of my guest today. Thanks to our friend Zoot Rollo, Bill Harkerode, we have Antennae Jimmy Semens, or as I like to call him, Jeff Cotton. Hi, Jeff. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Greg. Oh,
Ah,
I'm excited.
well, I'm so happy to meet you and to speak with you and talk about some of this really incredible work that you're a part of. Um, I should also mention that you're an avid composer and you're very much a musician through and through. And while you're known for those iconic recordings, there's a lot of other stuff going on in your musical mind. Is that not right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So, how did you get started? I'm interested in that part of California that you grew up in and sort of how it shaped your idea of what music was or what music could be.
hmm Well, my early years was in Central California, the breadbasket. Porterville, California, Lindsay. I was born in Lindsay, California, where Lindsay ripe olives, you may have heard of them. They're a famous brand. Um, and on my 13th birthday, I did get a guitar for my birthday. However, going back a little further, I started in third grade with flutophone, the little plastic thing. The next year in fourth grade, my angel, I call her grandmother, purchased me a LeBlanc clarinet, wood, a beautiful, wasn't a student model at all. And I was gone from that time on. I started reading music, of course. And by the end of that first year, myself and another really gifted horn player, clarinet player, we used to do duets at school and the Christmas programs and different things. And then going back a little further, I started singing with my mother when I was probably 6, 7 years old. She had been an entertainer in Alaska, had her own weekly radio program. She was a singer. And I used to sing harmony with her and her girlfriend on a weekly basis. And I loved that back in those days. And so on my 13th birthday, as I mentioned, my dad had found a guitar in the good friend's attic. It was an old K arch top guitar, didn't have any strings or anything. And he fixed it up, put strings on it, tuned it up for me. And then, so that's what I got on my 13th birthday. And from that time, I was gone. That was it for me. And then, of course, at 14, I moved to the Mojave Desert. And that's where, of course, Zappa and Beefheart and everybody was at the time. So got my first start there, and my first recording was, I was 14 and a half when we did that. And we did that on in an old recording studio, and the sound booth for vocal was an F-86. What do you call it? The windshield, that whole part right there, vertical. And so that's where we did our first recordings on 4-track Ampex, the exact same equipment that the Beatles used back then.
Now, is that the band that you had with Bill and John French?
No, that came later. This was the Exiles.
Ah,
And that our first record made it number 9 in the Valley at that time. So that was like magic for me at 14 and a half, 15 years old. Yeah, later came Blues in a Bottle. And also there were two other groups previous to that where John played with me. Bill, I think, didn't until Blues in a Bottle. But we had two groups previous. One was, let me see if I can even think of the names. The Intruders was one. And what was the other group? I can't even think of it. Oh, the Illusions. Not illusions, but illusions.
Were you intrusive and elusive?
Well, at that time, I was so unconscious as a kid. I was probably both and didn't know it.
Well, that's interesting, Jeff, because I'm wondering what's feeding those groups musically as you're growing.
What's feeding those groups? Well, I guess you'd say that the type of music we were playing. To go back a little further, I did take 4 guitar lessons when I got my guitar. And I learned Walk, Don't Run, chords and the lead. I remember walking out of that last lesson, walking through the parking lot and going, you know what? I don't need to take any more lessons. And I just started teaching myself by listening to records and things. So the groups, getting to answer your question, what was feeding us then? We used to listen to, what was his name? Hey, baby. He had a radio show and he sounded like Howlin' Wolf.
Wolfman Jack.
Yes, exactly. So I would cruise with my friends in their 57 Chevy out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and they'd be playing Jimmy Reed. I loved Jimmy Reed. It was just so light and flowing. With all they had is a snare drum, I think, maybe a hi-hat. And so that was an early influence. Of course, Howlin' Wolf and all of those groups. And you probably heard a lot of the stories about Blues in the Bottle and being scoped out by Don Vliet.
Well, tell me your recollections of that.
Okay, so we had a place called Exposition Hall in the Mojave Desert, and everybody played there. We had battles of the bands all the time. We battled Beefheart. They beat us by a little, but there was a previous concert, and we upstaged them at that time. I remember.
Now you're talking about a version of the Magic Band. You're talking about Captain Beefheart proper.
This is the real Captain Beefheart proper with Jerry Hanley, Alex Snoffer, and at the drummer at that time was P.G. Blakely, I believe. And he had a great role. He had one of those roles that you'd never forget, and that's what he was good at, but he just couldn't keep meter. So anyway, I remember the first time Don, we're on stage, and he walks right in front of us and stands right there and looks at each of us. And he's sizing everybody up. And what he's in his mind, he's going, I want this guy for 25th Century Quaker. He was going to have a group called 25th Century Quaker. And he wanted to use me as a guitar player at that time, is what I heard. I heard that later. But he looked at each of us, and of course, he was needing a drummer. Now, at that time, John French wasn't playing drums with us. He had on and off in the earlier bands and in Blues in the Bottle, but he was fronting the band on some of the songs because we were starting to do some Motown pieces. And he had that black voice. He really had a great sound. So, but Don looked at him, and I know he went, okay, this is the guy I want for drums. And so that's how he pulled John in. And of course, we loved the sound of the Magic Band. To me, at that time, I would have said it was like, it reminded me of a train just barreling down the tracks. And you get in the way of that train, I don't care what kind of pressure you got coming at you, it's going to mow you out of the way. And it was those arrangements of the instrumentation, counterpoint or whatever it was at the time. And that really, that stoked us.
Well,
and I think Don, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, yeah.
Well, I just think that there is a lot going on in that music. So the amount of energy coming off the stage, and I guess this is something that I haven't spoken enough with Bill about, but just, you know, the energy level of that band on stage, even when you see the videos, you can tell like it's really pretty intense on stage.
Yeah, it was powerful, very, very powerful. And I never heard a group like that. I mean, Hendrix was around then, and as a guitar player with all of the feedback and everything, that was powerful. But as far as a group arrangement, there's never been another Beefheart. I mean, we've played, you know, we've done back in those days, we've done concerts with people like Jefferson Airplane and
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. And literally, I'd say we blew them off the stage every time, just because of that powerful arrangement that we had.
And there were other bands checking out other bands. So you know that Airplane would have been aware. Yorma certainly would have been aware of what was going on
Oh yeah,
in Magic Band. Come on.
yeah,
I mean, I could
and
ask him, but I'm really, you know, it's interesting because
yeah,
there's also such a transformative aspect to that period where people are saying, well, to move from blues to where? What, you
it's
know, what else, what can we do? If blues is our foundational ethos, right? It was our original vocabulary. I'm
correct.
speaking for you on, you know, but correct me if I'm wrong. Then where do we go from that? And I, you know, checking out the Mirror Man strictly personal material, I
Uh-huh.
have to say it's pretty out there. It's already
Yeah,
getting very avant-garde. And I don't think enough people go behind or after Trout
uh,
Mask to understand the evolution to go from that period of 66, I'm sorry, 67, 68
right.
into Trout Mask. And I wonder if
That's
you could talk about that a little bit, because I mean, there's some really noisy and dissonant stuff on the Strictly Personal Mirror Man period. It's very aggressive.
that's true. Yes, I would love to speak to that. So when I came in, we one of the first. I think the first song we learned was "Trust Us." We were living in a little town called Tarzana, and we were known as the Nomads. We had a house and a lot of buildings that were all together. I don't know if it was a big old chicken coop or whatever it was, and we'd rehearse out there. That's the first song. But speaking to Mirror Man album, which was the second release after, of course, after Strictly Personal, it was basically Delta Blues. But what happened is before we left for the session, Dawn's girlfriend, Lori at the time, Dawn told her, spike their tea with LSD. So she did, and we had no clue. I remember TTG Studios was a very popular studio at the time. And as you'd walk in the studio part from the offices, there were these big, probably fiberglass doors that open, and they had rubber in the middle so the sound doesn't come through. And I went to push the door to go in. And as I did, they were like 25 feet high all of a sudden, and they were rubber. And so we were coming on, both John and I. So that the entire session of, let's see, what did we do? What were those songs? At any rate, those songs were done on acid, and also a few others that came later, like Corn Ring Finger and a few other, that was purely just blowing it in the studio, just going for it. And a lot of feedback, of course. So that's probably why the traditional Delta blues didn't stay traditional to a large degree. Now, I can't speak for Alex St. Clair, Alex Snoffer. He didn't have acid, but he was just really good at that kind of stuff. He whatever Don wanted, he could do it. And I give him a lot of credit, because when I came into the group, he was the one that got me up to speed on the songs and things like that. So the early stuff was transmitted from guitar player to guitar player. Some of it Don transmitted with whistles, or of course with he didn't have a horn back then. John and I bought him his first horn, soprano sax. But that was the beginning of it right there.
Not piano. He's
No,
not
there was
showing.
no piano until Trout Mask. So strictly personal, of course, you could see the evolution. It's getting further out. But if we want to go back to probably the reason that Don would even approve or stomach that type of feedback and change from the standard Delta blues is because the story I heard was that I think it was in 65 or maybe 66, they came to the Magic Band came to Hawaii, to Honolulu and Waikiki. And here they are playing clubs, you know, they didn't belong there, but that's where the manager put them. And people wanted to hear what they wanted to hear, the local folks, you know, it's like, play us da 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 da. And of course, they had no clue. They were doing their own music. So that was a tough time for them. But with the story I heard is they were Waikiki, walking down the street, window shopping, looking around. Somebody offered Don this vial of liquid, and it was LSD, pure, a vial. And from that time on, he said that the sky was red. It was no longer blue. So I think that blew him out. And of course, he was such an eccentric, and he was schizophrenic. He was definitely schizophrenic and paranoid schizophrenic. That kind of opened him up in that way, I believe, musically. So here we are back in the studio. We're on acid, John and I, and we're playing. And that's why you have Delta Blues with a little starting to go the other direction. And of course, you've heard the story about Strictly Personal, how we had gone to Europe right after we recorded it. And that's when Bob Krasnow took it and cut it up, put the heartbeat and all that stuff in it. Now, my take on that, if you want to know, is I think it really helped. I like it. I really like it. Don said he hated it at first, but I don't know if he held to that opinion or not.
Well, do you remember him hating it?
I remember him just screaming and yelling and cussing.
Okay.
We'd gone to there and the Rolling Stones had just built and opened their new offices in London. And so they invited us to come preview the album. And unfortunately, at that time, with what the Stones were going through personally, they didn't even show up. So we sat there and nothing happened. But Don really hated that. If the Stones were there, I don't know what he would have said. But I don't know if he ever liked it. I mean, I agree with him. It's sad that we were not informed that Krasnow was going to do that. But Bob Krasnow was a supreme acid head. He was older than us, but he dropped all the time.
Mm.
So when we recorded, what's the name of the one before for Strictly Personal?
Mirror
Man. Yeah. When we recorded that, he was high as could be.
Mm.
And I know he was when he mixed it and before he mastered it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I to what degree psychedelics affected jazz and rock and all of these different areas of expression around that time. Some experiences could be bad, some experiences could be good. I always found it interesting that Ringo said, yeah, we did drugs, but never when we were in the studio working.
Right.
Which was believable to me. So, you know, it's not like they didn't do drugs, but this whole idea of now thinking of sound as part of music.
Right. Right. Not categorizing it and putting it in a box, but literally, yeah, sound itself. I agree with you there. It's interesting, just to speak a little to that. Acid to me woke me up. It opened me up. In fact, that helped me. That when I first joined the Magic Band and got drafted, I was drafted.
Can you
It
talk about
helped me.
that a little bit? Because I know that there's an
Yeah.
interesting, I don't know if I'd say hierarchy, but a sort of uh, a time period where you're coming in, but you've already
Mhm.
played with Hargler Road, but now he's not in the Magic Band, but you are, and
Right.
now you've been sort of brought in by the other guitarist, and now Bill's going to come in, and you're going to stay, but the other guy's going to go. So hit me with that.
Yeah. So um, I came in, and of course, it was Alex that taught me a lot of the stuff because Don at that time didn't have a lot to do with that. Even back in those days, Don had no real sense of rhythm, timing. You'd have to tell him when to come in and start singing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Uh, Now I kind of jumped the track there
But
about,
so you're coming in and you're learning the stuff. Now
right.
is what's the transition to Alex leaving and you getting
Oh,
Bill in there? Were you responsible for getting Bill in?
here's the good question. Here, the good thing. What happened? It wasn't good for them. But Don would never play live, very seldom. And you don't make money if you don't play. And both Alex and the bass player, Jerry Hanley, had families. And they couldn't just sit there and on promises. And so it was time for them to move on, and they did. So there was a period of time, gosh, it's a little mixed up in my mind. At any rate, to answer your question, John basically brought me in, I believe, because we had played together so much. Then uh, he and I decided Bill would be the guy because he was in later incarnations of Blues in the Bottle. And I wanted to speak to Bill about Bill Harkleroad and myself. As you know, guitar players, they can have big egos from time to time.
I do know.
Yeah. Bill Harkleroad and I never had any issues. We were brothers. And he'd do a solo, and that would get me stoked and a little freaked out. And I'd do one, and it would get him stoked and a little freaked out. We played off one another, but we never had those issues. And that's one reason the Trout mask came out the way it did. And with John and I and Bill, I can say, and Mark, when he came in, never had an altercation or an issue ever about anything. So we could really focus when we got to the Trout mask time. Um,
And
yeah,
is John music directing at that point?
John began to music direct on Trout mask. What happened is we got the piano, and before we got the piano, we did Silver Spoon. What? Not Silver Spoons. What's that one? On Strictly Personal. There were two songs on Strictly Personal that we actually recorded before the Trout mask time.
Oh,
What's the names of them? I can't remember right now, but they were transmitted by Don vocally or whistles. Um, and also at that time, I think Alex was in the group, but then he left. We pulled Bill in, and then of course Bill learned the parts, and then we went on from there. And then of course it was Bill, John, and I that pulled in Mark. So now we had the original Blues in a Bottle, late incarnation of Blues in a Bottle, the group that literally Don was really threatened at one point because of our group. I mean, we were hot. It's just that we did not have at that time enough original material to really say that we were we were that. And Beefheart did.
You know, just hearing these stories, I am so fascinated by the idea of a music scene in the Mojave Desert in the 60s.
Yeah.
Like, what's that about, Jeff?
Yeah. What is that about? I do know that the desert definitely, and I love the desert. It has a beauty and a subtlety. I mean, there's something about that place. And, we all know that whether you're into the spiritual side of life and you want to meditate, or you're a musician, a creative person, when you get to the silence, that really helps you do what you're going to do. I mean,
Um,
there's nothing else to do there but take drugs and play music. And if you're into girls, that. But you know what? We were so into our music, even from our earlier years, we didn't get sidetracked with that to a large degree. So that was good.
it's
But
like,
yeah,
yeah, you were serious. You guys were like isolated, regional, and you're serious.
that's true.
And
That
you
is true.
broke out of that region.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, so there was competition. There were enough bands. There were venues. There were people coming to shows. There was the ability to be gigging.
Oh, there was. And that makes me remember back in the Blues in the Bottle days and the previous couple of small groups. We used to play at the high school, Antelope Valley High School. That's where Don went. That's where Frank went before us, because they were both 7, 8 years older than us. We would play at the lunch breaks. They'd put a stage up, and we jam and play. We even did a couple of what do you call them, assemblies, where you go in and all the
Oh.
bleachers up, and there's 1,000 kids. Boy, were those fun times. We did that stuff too.
So to what degree coming up are you aware of Zappa?
I myself, I didn't really look too much to Zappa, or even I wasn't aware of him in those days.
Mhm.
Now, when Freak Out came out, I listened to it and I enjoyed it to some extent. It had great humor, but that's about it for me. I wasn't really a Zappa fan.
So how does this translate then into you working with him on Trout Mask so closely?
Well, the only thing that I did with him, other than the fact that he recorded us in the
Yes.
house, in the Trout house before we went into the studio, um, is we did the piece. What's it called? The Blimp,
The blimp, the blimp.
the mothership. Yeah. Oh, I could do that
It's
one
the
again.
blimp.
Yeah, I could do that one again. That was fun. Now that was done, of course, as you know, over the phone. We just finished. I was the guy. So John, by that time, Trout Mask, he was the music guy. He took it all down. He'd come to us and say, okay, here's the part. How do you want to do it? And we all had different styles. John's talked about that, of how we absorbed the music and the parts. Um, I jumped the track again.
Well,
Oh
just
God.
working with Frank in
Oh
the house, and I guess I
yeah.
always am curious of your perspective on what he's bringing to it, what his hand is in this.
Okay. I would have to say his hand was very little in that, even in the house. I mean, he brought the 2-track, I think it was, recorder in, and he brought Dick Kunk in, the engineer, who did the or the, he had a few things he said about the slate and all this stuff. So there wasn't a lot. It's just that what happened there, of course, is Don says to Frank, he says, we got to go in the studio. These guys just can't play. It just can't happen here. Well, we were hot. We were just happy because this is what we did every day for 9 months for 12 to 14 hours. And we could just do it with our eyes closed. And, it's like I've had people say, I'm amazed that you guys never counted anything off. You did all you do is say, and you're gone. So that's what we did.
I
Um,
love and has always been one of my favorites. Like Good luck on we're going to play a piece now in 1916. And
And that's true. So anyway, the only real connection I had with Frank was doing the piece over the phone. And you could hear what he said. He said, "Wait a minute," and he goes and he cues it up. He doesn't tell me. He says, "Go," and that's how that happened.
so where were you where were you on the phone?
Probably in Don's bedroom, because I was the what do you call him, amanuensis or whatever, the scribe. See, what happened is John would be working all these hours, taking the music down with Don, sometimes overnight, and then you'd have to get up in the morning and rehearse. Well, I was the guy that spent just as much time with Don in the bedroom all night long, no sleep, taking down the lyrics as he'd write them and deciding which word I should put. What's the real meaning behind this word? I've only got 30 seconds to do this whole thing, so I would do that. So
now, wait a minute. That's no small thing, Jeff, because we've never heard this before. You're involved in the lyrical process?
See, that's what I did, and John did the music. So I would sometimes all night long, the sun would be coming up, and I'm going, God, I would like to have a little nap. But the guys are now tuning up to rehearse. So Jeff goes in there like a zombie, picks up his guitar, and tries to play. And it was a challenge, just like it was a challenge for John. He hardly ever got to rehearse Trout Mask until it was time to do it. And so he and I were both really challenged in that way. Sometimes I'd space out. But I mean, we spent so many days and nights in his bedroom, and I'd take everything down. And in fact, there are a few pieces I've seen on the internet that I actually pinned. It's still my handwriting. They just put it up there.
Okay, cool. And so something like the Blimp, is that you riffing, or are you reading off a script, or what's
I'm
going
reading it after just writing it.
You
down
wrote it.
For Don.
Don wrote it. Don
He
dictated it.
We had no creative at all. We had no opportunity. I can make one thing about that is there was one time in all of those months, the Trout Mask days in the house, where Don came to us and he said, "I would like each of you guys to write something musically." And we did. Now, I remember what Bill did, and I remember what I did. I don't remember what Mark or John did. And it was good. In fact, you wouldn't have known it was done by us had it been put in the song, in the arrangement. And Don immediately dismissed us. It was no, that was it. He was giving us our little moment of fame in the house, and then that was gone.
Well, was this another manipulation technique?
I think it was. Yeah. He didn't need us. Yeah, I didn't think he didn't think he needed us, put us that way in that area. But as you know, and you said it in when we first started here, there was creativity. We had creativity for us to be able to play those things together and be in the flow, where I'm in 5/4, Bill's in 7/4, Mark's in 11/4, John's in something else. And to make that happen where we would come together. It is very repetitious, as you know. Trout Mask is repetitious. Bill will play 4 times that riff, and I'll play 4 times my riff, but we may be in different times. So it is mechanical in that way, but that's what makes Trout Mask what it is, in a sense, I think.
No, I think so too. It's almost just too typical to say this, but it is its own thing. It is what it is. It's its own organism. It's not strictly personal. Mm-hmm. I like to see the transition, but when you get the Trout Mask, the fact that you guys are so tight as a unit that it
Mhm.
actually is revelatory to me that there'd been so much playing together in other situations. You
Mhm.
come into this, you're like a ready-made band for him, which is one of the reasons I think
Mhm.
he misinterprets that he has to like teach you how to play, or he has this idea that he has about I've got to,
Yeah.
break them down and change them in my, into my own image,
Yeah.
sort of bullshit. But
Yeah.
I find that interesting because Frank didn't like it if bass players and drummers came into the band together.
Right.
So you sort of
Right.
see, right? You see this idea of like pre-exist. You don't exist until you're in my universe.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's true. We were tight, and because of our relationship as friends, we could work together and play that kind of stuff. But
And
he wanted. Go ahead.
did that get you through the tough times? The friendship?
Yes, yes, it definitely did. Um, what was I going to say about that? The tough times. Yes, I can speak for myself, and that is when you think of the tension that was there. We'd have the bathroom incidents where we'd go in and he would turn the water on, and you'd wonder who the bad guy is today. And it may take 6 hours of them beating you down and telling you you're this, you're that. You just don't cut it. Are you stupid? For hours. And so that was very stressful. And what was going on in our minds while that was happening, whether it was Bill, John, me, or Mark that was under the gun, were going in our minds, God, we got to rehearse. We want to do music. We don't want to waste our time at this. But nobody would say that. He was 7 years older than us. He was already a developed personality. Here we are all, I mean, Bill especially, he'd come out of the acid thing full on, and he was wide open. We were all wide open. And so Don could manipulate in that way. But we did believe in the music, and we, of course, and so we could hide or not hide, but find solace in playing together, because that's why we were there in the first place, is to play together. So that was a focus that kept us sane when we were playing. The problem is when we weren't playing, anything could happen. And I've got a lot of stories about that.
I bet you
But
do. Yeah.
when we get to that point, I do. Would you like to take it perhaps from um, Trout Mask House recordings and Don saying, "We want to go in the studio. Come on, get us in there, Frank."
Please.
So Frank takes us in his studio, the studio that he had rented, and I guess it was North Hollywood or wherever it was. So this guy Frank had as many hours as he needed. He was a very successful guy by that time, but he didn't give us much time. So we did the entire album, basic tracks, in 6 hours, as you probably heard. And one take on probably at least 50% of the songs, maybe two takes on the rest.
I bet.
Now dig this, I watched Frank, at that time, Moon Zappa was 1 year old.
Huh.
She came into the studio, they brought her in, he's holding her while we're recording. And that's why I say in Ella Guru, he was holding her. I was saying hi to Moon. And at one point, so he gives the baby back to whoever had the baby at the time. I don't know who it was. And Frank falls asleep at the console.
Oh.
That shows you he had nothing he had to do once he got the levels. Nothing. He wasn't a producer. He wasn't anything. He just took it down, fell asleep. 30 seconds later, he woke up. That's what that was about. And we did it in that amount of time, and we had to. And then, of course, a few days it took for Don to do to overdub the vocals. And I came in, of course, to overdub the vocals on Ella Guru, and Pina. I did Pina there.
And it's such a classic vocal take. Can you tell me about recording that vocal on Pina?
All I can say is it was just a lot of fun. You see, I really got Don in his lyrics from the beginning. Otherwise, I would have said no, probably, to taking it all down and having that part to do. So when we did Pina, I was just full blown. You just go for it. It was theater, and I loved it, just like I did when I did the Blimp. It's the same thing, same type of thing.
I like that even going back to the idea of Captain Beefheart being a character,
Yeah,
and that then you guys are each named characters in his band, and then you take on characters. I mean, let me ask you straight up, Jeff, what the fuck is Pina about?
what is Pina about?
Is
A
there,
fantasy in Don's head is all I can tell you. I mean, he put so many things together that didn't seem to make sense.
I sat on
But
a turned on waffle iron.
yeah, and viewed the whatever they were, the beautiful. Yeah,
And then that's raspberries. Like,
yeah, that's the raspberries. Yeah, that was pretty fun stuff. But I understood a lot of what he did have to say in his songs. I think he's one of the best poets of the time. Him and Bob
100%
Dylan.
not said enough, in control of words, painting pictures, making comments, very funny,
Mm-hmm.
really good wordplay all the time. Can't turn it off, as
That's
you
right.
know, right? I mean, he
Yeah.
goes on Letterman and he's still, doing one-liners.
Yeah.
It's just like that mind. And he really was a poet. I mean, any of those pieces, and I teach these pieces in my song class. Like, you look
Mm-hmm.
at Well, or
Mm-hmm.
you look at one of those recitation pieces, and they're really beautiful symbolism and color,
Mm-hmm.
texture. You
The
know,
white ice horse melted like a spot of silver. Well, yeah.
my
And I
my
remember
mind
all
cracked
those.
like custard.
Yeah, my mind cracked like custard. His mind did crack like custard.
Yeah,
He was like a little child. Kids, they go until there's no steam left. They fall down. They go to sleep. Don was like that the whole time. Yep.
ah. But he wasn't really. Was he using stimulants? Was he staying awake on coffee? What was it?
No, he was drinking tea. I think it's just a creative side. I think all of us to some extent have that. When we're on, and time goes flying by, and that's just the way he was. As a little child, he was allowed, right,
Right.
to just create, to the point you probably heard the stories that when he was young and he was sculpting, he would sculpt in the dark, and he would not open his door for his parents to see him, feed him. He never called them mom and dad. It was Glenn and whatever the mom's name was. She would have to shove the food under the door. But he got his way to the point that the ego knew no bounds. And you can come to the point, I guess, when you can either go on the dark side or you can go on the other side. And it's darkness when you use pain and other ways to control.
That's a very succinct way of putting it. And those of us who've done the research and have heard the stories from the people that were there know
Yeah,
that in many ways it was a fucked up situation. We can just
it
say,
was. It was, but again, thanks to the fact that we were dedicated and we believed in the music, nothing was going to get in the way of that, and it didn't. Thank God.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have recollections of working on things like Dali's car with Bill?
Oh yeah, yeah. Speaking to Dolly's car again, Bill and I've never done a piece with anyone like Dolly's Car, that we were so one. You can't tell who is who. It doesn't even, it could be one big 12-string guitar or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah.
That's just because there was no ego, no issues, no ego, no goo. And I remember learning it, and because by that time it was from the piano to the guitars. Da 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 da. Yeah, that was a great piece.
Do-do-da-do-do-da-doom. Yeah, I mean
You
that,
know it.
yeah, I love it. I think, the interesting thing too that for us as Beefheart fans is, the arranging of the guitars, the thoughtful ways of utilizing two guitars, bass and drums and
Mhm.
other. That it goes on to affect bands like XTC, that are listening to this, and the
Mhm.
idea of dissonant guitars. Why
Mhm.
must two guitars, be in perfect harmony?
True.
Also, guitar tone. That record, the guitar tone is pretty brutal at times.
Now, let me speak to that real quickly.
Please.
It's not like we had money to go buy amplifiers. We used what we had. I think he may have brought the amp I was using. All I tried to do is just try to get a decent sound with what I had. And that's the way it was, not only on Trout Mass, but when we toured. Sometimes we had ridiculous equipment. And the only good equipment I can remember in those days, because I was only around until 1969. I think I was there 2.5 years. So there's not much video. There hasn't been much video footage with me or anything. It was after that. Is when Jeff Beck loaned his equipment in Europe. We had beautiful Marshall amps, and that made a big difference. Really did. He was so kind as to say, "Here, take it all."
Really?
Yeah. Our manager didn't have it together. I mean, as you probably know, um, the end of the tour, he splits with all the money and leaves us. So, yeah, that's how it was. John and I were always hungry. But funny thing is, when I look back, because I was so young and I'd never been to Europe and doing all this stuff, it didn't really bother me that much. It wasn't an issue. It's kind of like a mosquito buzzing around and you whack it off and forget about it. That's how it was.
Yeah,
And
because living it was so great just being there, right?
it was in the 60s. The 60s was happening. It really was. And thanks to John Peel when we went to Europe, because he was the man that put Beefheart on the map. Not only that, he's the one that kept John and I alive. As soon as we hit the airport, I think it was, he gave us a big bag of, I don't know what it's called. It's like muesli. It's a cereal. He gave that to John and I. And so we kind of lived on that a lot of the time. Where Don might be out having a steak with somebody,
Yeah.
he didn't go without. He always had his stuff.
It's so peculiar.
It is. It
I
is.
just, it's just such a, like no other record has probably ever been made under these circumstances.
No, there hasn't. We were in a pressure cooker, and that's why I believe if we played it today, it would be a lot better technically, but it wouldn't be the same because we weren't in a pressure cooker where our lives were basically at stake.
Is it one of the first home recordings?
Would that be one of the first? I'm really not sure. Could have been. I
I'm
mean,
apart from Les Paul here in New Jersey, I think,
oh,
home
yeah,
studio.
yeah, it could be. Could be.
So
Mhm.
were gigs stressful to you in terms of bringing Don in and Don remembering lyrics and Don being kept in the game?
Uh, Back in my days, which was the early days, not a lot. because I wasn't in charge of that part. I remember the first gig. So I'd been in the band, I don't know, a few weeks probably, when we played. We went to San Francisco. We played the Avalon Ballroom. We were on with Buddy Guy, Big Mama Thornton, and someone else. I don't remember who it was. And so I had just learned the pieces. And so we're in the hotel room before we go on, and we're in Krasnow, the manager's hotel room. And so he brings out some weed and he gets us ripped. Now, you usually don't do that when you've just learned these pieces and you're going on for the first time with the band. But we did, and it worked out great. We made it. I didn't have any problem. But as far as Don, we were still, most of that music was traditional. We did Down in the Bottom, and we did Somebody and Calling, and what is some of the Howlin' Wolf stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that music is out. I don't know if you've heard it. There is an album available. I've heard it on the internet, of that recording at the Avalon Ballroom. And it was good because we were really doing a lot of Delta blues. We weren't freaky.
Well,
But
that's interesting, though, because, the blues thing is exploding all over England.
Yeah.
And that remains a stronghold of a Beefheart audience, is the UK.
That's true. However, at that time, of course, as you know, and in the US, blues was not Delta blues. It was city blues. B.B. King, people like that. Hendrix, of course, took that to another degree, but nevertheless, it was from the city blues. And we were the only people doing the Delta blues that I know of. In fact, what's his name? Gosh, I'm terrible with names, as you can see. Remember the Rising Suns?
Eric Burdon.
The Rising Suns. Now that
the Rising Suns. Okay.
Yeah. Ry Cooder, guitar player.
Okay.
What's his name? The wonderful colored guy that sang on that. I'm sorry that I don't remember his name. He's very big. But anyway, he used to come into our sessions. And I think the Rising Suns were still together at the time. He used to come and listen when we were recording. He really loved what we were doing at the time. Taj Mahal. That's who it was, Taj.
So Taj could see the connection with what you guys are doing. It's so interesting because, he's still at it.
Yeah, he is.
And that is considered a form of classic or classical music now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think, to a certain degree, though, Beefheart makes the biggest leap with it. So if we're talking about Americana, if we're talking about roots music, some people called it hillbilly music originally, then blues, all of these things that are connoted by that sound.
Mm-hmm.
But then speaking to Harker Road, he tells me, well, we were listening to Stockhausen. We were listening to Out stuff.
Right.
And those worlds had to collide, as it did with the Beatles. I mean, Stockhausen is on one of the faces on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, that's fairly interesting when you're thinking about tape, using the studio, using the studio as you did as a kind of, if you look at Freak Out and you look at Trout Mask, you're seeing that it's kind of being used as radio theater.
It is.
Am I far off?
Oh, no, that's right on. I agree with you. Totally. It is. I don't know if you remember the Fire Sign Theater. They were a group.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, they used to come hang out. They loved us, and vice versa. I'll tell you, if you don't mind me going somewhere else with this,
please.
The greatest inspiration to me early on in the band, we had moved from Tarzana, from the Nomad house, and we were living in Woodland Hills, the house previous to Trout Mask. At that time, we all got involved in transcendental meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And that really helped us, including Dawn, keep a peaceful demeanor. Personally, it really helped us at that time. At that time also, we went down and we saw in Hollywood, we went and saw Son House play live. That was the greatest inspiration in those years for me. Sitting right in front of him and watching him play. It was sad at the same time because Son was old. He was a real alcoholic by that time. And his manager used the bottle. Literally, the bottle was right there with the manager on the side of the stage. And Son said, I want a drink. And he says, you sing that song first, and then you get to have a drink. That was the sad part. But the good part was what he did with that instrument. We bought, at that time, I don't remember which album of his it was. It's my favorite. And I've taken acid and laid down and listened to that album. And I got it immediately with Bottleneck, how those guys like Son House got that crying sound with that instrument. And it just opened up to me right there. And
well, anyone that knows my stuff knows that I always try to include some slide guitar in my writing or in the piece. And so I'm interested in this kind of geeky idea of the metal finger versus the glass finger.
Okay. Of course, in those days, I was using the metal. John, I think Bill was using the glass because Don wanted him to use the glass. I always loved the glass better, as all I use now is glass. But yeah, and you know the difference. The metal is hard edged. It doesn't have quite the sustain, but it has that sound, which was really good for Trout Mask. And you get the long, smooth sustain with glass, and I love that.
And so you and Bill were playing slide at various times?
We played together slide on pieces. In fact, even before Bill, when it was the original with Alex and me playing guitar, we both played slide or Bottleneck. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that, you know, when we did Bill's solo album, Bozo Under the Sea, he just made such a strong case for a slide in fairly complex harmonic music, you know, so-called jazz, post-jazz harmonic content. And you know, it's such a beautiful vocalistic kind of sound. And of course, I just saw John McLaughlin with the latest Shock T stuff, and just the, you know, the idea of like Jerry Douglas opening for Shock T on Dobro, you know, and that kind of language, which appears in different cultures, but you know, the Bottleneck slide, the slide guitar sound is such an immediately rootsy American sound, but other cultures are using the same idea of the notes between the notes.
There you go. Yeah. Same with horn. It's like I've been playing soprano, but bass clarinet ever since high school. And I always loved going in an upper range where you don't have C sharp. It's more like a Bottleneck. You can actually do that with your armature. I love that, and that's why I love Bottleneck. You know, of course, you take somebody like Jeff Beck, who got it down so much without Bottleneck. He could have had a Bottleneck.
You couldn't tell.
Nope.
No,
I'm getting there a lot now, and the new stuff I'm doing, where I can hardly tell a difference in Bottleneck. It's totally different style than Jeff's, but I love.
Are you using a whammy?
No, I don't.
Wow. Okay.
No, I don't like that. I just use, and I don't use light strings either. I use, maybe they call them light gauge, but they're not light gauge. They're not, they're not the telephone poles we used on Trout Mask. I mean, my E string was a 56.
You see now, okay,
Yeah,
I never brought this up with Bill before, but it sounds like it. It sounds like jangling hunks of metal being
exactly.
collided with other giant hunks of metal.
That's true. Big
Oh my,
chunks of metal, telephone poles, like the telephone wires, excuse me. Yeah, and you know what? In rehearsals for Trout Mask, there were times I would break 3 or 4 strings in one rehearsal. Those strings, it's at that time, it's like I had these arms, like my arms were big and my neck was big from the tension, and the rest of me was little. It was kind of funny. We had a guy. There were times back before Trout Mask, between Strictly Personal. There was one time, and I can't place exactly when it was, where John was kicked out of the band, so I had to take over teaching the parts and things. We brought in a jazz guitar player from L.A., and he would not play with us unless he could bring his drummer. Well, of course, that's fine. So we had him and his drummer. His name was George Kohler, and he was a great jazz player. But that's not what the band needed, was a jazz player. I teach him the parts, but he just wasn't there, and they didn't last too long. Those guys didn't last too long.
I mean, I don't know if I would say clean sound, but
Yeah,
it's
clean
not.
and very detailed in sound. Of course, you know what? Bill is very clean. He is accurate, but
Oh
he can
yeah.
also, he doesn't have to stick to some genre that we, doesn't stick to jazz as it is. The
No, he
old jazz.
doesn't.
Yeah. I would love to do something with Bill. In fact, let me just put a little thing in here. We may end up, if we can get it together, the 4 of us again, doing a couple of those songs. There's going to be a new release, you've probably heard it, of Trout Mask.
Yeah.
So that would be wonderful if we could do that. Just the logistics, though, of the recording, and Mark is way out in the boonies.
Right.
But that would be wonderful, wouldn't it, to hear what 2 of those say. John was saying he'd love to do Steal Softly Through Snow and Hair Pie. I love Hair Pie. I love Steal Softly. My favorite song was My Human Gets Me Blues,
Mm.
but that's just me. But
Moonlight
it was,
on Vermont.
oh yeah, now that was early, right? Bill had just come in and he just learned that guitar part, and we recorded it.
Yeah, there's so many to choose from. It would be great since all
Yeah,
4 of you are around and capable.
yeah.
I know Bill has trouble with his ears, but
Hmm.
just if there's some way to figure it out, it certainly would be wonderful. But I will
Yeah,
also say that you guys don't owe us anything. You left it all on the playing field. You made a very serious mark. And even just off of one record, just off of 1 or 2 songs, you have just changed music. And don't
yeah.
let anybody ever say that the Magic Band wasn't part of the creative process of Captain Beefheart's music. I
Thank you.
I always want to just drive that home, knowing you guys and knowing what happened and knowing about Don's musicality or
Yeah,
limitations, let's say.
yeah,
I know that this is impossible without the people like Jeff Cotton and Bill Harkerode and John French.
yeah.
And there's no other way for a true fan of the music to look at it, I believe. I mean, obviously you need a catalyst. There's a front man there, maybe
Hmm.
absentee front man at times, but
Sure.
something to coalesce around. And you guys were you were riding something, riding it like a wave, and it was going to have its moment, and
Hmm.
it probably wasn't going to be forever for everybody, but
Hmm.
for many of us, it's timeless music.
Yeah, still nothing has been done like it. I always, of course, back in those days, in the Trout Mass days, as you mentioned, we listened to Stockhausen and Boulez and all those people, but we also listened to Coltrane.
Right. And
Uh,
Ornette.
yes, and Ornette. To me, Trout Mask did what not Ornette, but Coltrane did to jazz is what we did in rock to a large degree. Just break the forms down, forget about it, and go from there.
I would tend to agree. I mean, later
Yeah.
Coltrane certainly was going out, and not everybody was happy about that. But
Nope.
to this moment,
Yeah.
it's super important music, interstellar space. I mean, there's just
True.
so much music coming out of that guy. And
Hmm.
then even though, I will say I like that Don came back and in the 80s finished up on
Hmm.
a note.
Sure.
And I wanted to know, like, did you keep in touch with him at all over the years? Were you aware of his later stuff? Were you aware of his paintings career?
I was aware of his paintings because he sketched us, and I wish we had those sketches. He did. They were fantastic. They weren't abstract. They were really good of each of us, and our character came out in those, and I don't know what happened to them. So I was aware of his art. Um, his albums after I left the band, I didn't really listen to much of it, and I have. And honestly, they don't do much for me. After Trout Mask, nothing. And they were excellent. I mean, Bill took the helm on some of that, and musically, it is fine. But Trout Mask is the one that broke the mold, and everything after it was perhaps similar to some extent, except when Don decided to try to be in it for the money, as Frank would put it.
Well, yeah. He tried as many things as he could, but at the end of the day, was much
Yeah.
happier to be painting.
Yeah.
And who I it's funny, I say to people, who can blame Phil Collins for saying, "Oh, maybe I could be a singer or a drummer. Which one do you think would be better?" Like maybe
Sure.
if I have a painting career, why do I need to mess with the music business that did nothing but shit on me and steal from me the whole time? And now I
True.
have a real career as a painter doing what was initially his first love.
That's true. As well as he did not have to deal with the personalities of musicians because he was not good in that way. He just didn't know how to do that unless he got you one on one. One on one, he could just woo you and make you feel like $1 million 1 minute and that you're the only thing on earth. But once that time is over, it changed. But yeah, it's
Yeah, Bill,
amazing.
Bill mentioned that, one on one, totally different person.
Yeah. And especially when you first come in the group, you're the star at that point in time.
Uh-huh. The honeymoon period.
Yeah. It's real short, but sweet. When I
Well,
came into the group and we were in Tarzana at the house there, the nomad place, what pulled me in, see, I'd had a lot of acid and it was a good thing. Most of it was really good, but I wanted to turn the world on. And Don, he knew how to draw you in, and it was so I was the guy for the first few weeks, and so he and I'd go out driving in the Jag and go out at midnight to the donut shop, and Don would want to be. He's always out there. He's got a girl at home, lady at home, but he's always out there looking. And I wasn't into that, but here's a young guy, and I'm just kind of along for the ride. He was. What was I going to tell you about that part? Um, Now I don't remember what it was. You'll have to cut this
so
out.
so when you guys are cruising for burgers, as it
Yeah,
were, like he's
donuts.
cruising for
Donuts,
donuts.
just like the policeman.
I
But
well,
anyway, oh,
yeah.
now I got it. I'm back on track. So Don started intimating to me. He said, "You know what, Jeff? I don't know what's happening. I'm really scared. I really need help." So here's this big-hearted young guy from the desert, Jeff, going, "Oh, I'd love to help you, Don. What do you need?" Da 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 da. He drew me in, and I opened up. But then that was it. It wasn't like he went any further. It's just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what's going on. Help me, help me. And I wanted to help.
This is all learned behavior. Yeah.
Yep.
He was
Go ahead, please.
he was smart enough probably from an early age to figure out how to manipulate the situation.
Yeah, he manipulated his parents from the earliest years and got away with it. So he was able to do that, except with certain people. I mean, Alex St. Clair took no shit from Don.
And Ry Cooder, I think, also, right?
Yeah, but that's quite different, I think. Ry kept it to business. He was brought in because the company wanted him to play with the group so they could get the album together. Alex grew up with him, basically. And he knew Don when he was whatever he was, short hair. What should I say? And there's nothing wrong with short hair, but he was selling shoes, for instance. And Don would, I understand, Don would try to assert himself, and Alex would go, no. Don tried to have an image that he was tough, and he wasn't tough. And I found that out. I don't know if you've heard this story, but this at the time really helped me. It's not ego. It's just at that time when you're so beat down that it's just like he's got you on a tether like a little dog. We were rehearsing, and this was only about 2 months before I got kicked out with a punctured lung. We were rehearsing, and Don comes to me. We're in the fire engine red living room, and he comes to me and says, "Jeff, come on, let's go outside. I want you to come with me." So I put my guitar down. As we're walking out and going down the steps, Bill and I used to rehearse in the laundry room. So he took me in the laundry room, and as he's going out there, he's putting on his leather gloves, and he's got this look on his face like, "I'm going to kick your ass." And he's got his black leather jacket on. He's trying to scare me. We get out into the room facing one another, and he starts to punch me. I blocked his punch. Every punch he threw, I blocked perfectly. I wasn't even thinking. I was in that state, looking him in the eye. He tried about 6, 7 times to punch me. And all of a sudden, he backs up by the door, looks this way, and he looks back at me and says, "Fuck, man." And he took off. He couldn't do it. He couldn't get to me. Physically. I didn't even tell the guys this happened, because by that time, he had pitted us against one another at times where we were fighting one another and not knowing why and feeling bad about it, but forgiving one another because we knew there was a sick situation going on. So let's bring it up to the time when I get kicked out. We're rehearsing. Don comes in his robe because he sleeps most of the time. He comes in and he looks at the temporary drummer, Rochelle. He just looks at him like this. Rochelle gets off of the throne and he comes over. Now, I have no idea. I have my guitar on. I have no idea what's going on. And he's wearing cowboy boots. He picks his foot up and he kicks me with the heel of his cowboy boot, knocks me down. I have a punctured lung. I get taken to the hospital. So this was years later, I put 2 and 2 together. He couldn't bully me into thinking that he was a badass. And so he used the other guy to do it. And I don't hold any grudges against Jeff Rochelle. I don't, because he was just a pawn at that time too. But that's what I think he was trying to get back at me for that he couldn't get to me before. Now,
Wow.
I'd like to say it didn't change after the incident where I blocked everything. From that time on, I didn't think about it anymore. So I didn't connect it, but I did connect it later when the guy kicked me. And Don wanted me to come back, but I wouldn't do it. My dad came down from Lancaster, picked me up, took me home, and I went on from there.
So were there a lot of physical altercations that you witnessed or were
There were
part of?
quite a few. There were, when the time that he took John with a broom handle to get him, to poke him. John and I also, I beat John up one time and he didn't fight back because why should he? And I wouldn't have fought back. It's like I had no idea why I did it.
Jesus. Yeah.
No idea. So see, this is the sad part of the situation. Brothers that have never had an altercation or even a flare up of egos, protective thing happen all the years previous. He had us to that point where we were so paranoid. John would not confide in me and I would not confide in him or Bill for fear that we would be on the hot seat next.
Divide and conquer.
That's right. And I remember you've probably heard the stories. Bill probably told you the stories about Manson and how all that all happened.
Yeah.
So he had spent a lot of time, I think, Don had, in learning how to control people. I remember I don't know if anybody'd ever told this story, but there was a call in the Trout days while we were rehearsing, and picked up the phone, and it was Mick Jagger. And Mick, did you hear that story?
No.
So Mick asked, he said, I want to talk to Don. Can I talk to Don? So hand the phone to Don. And a few seconds later, Don starts laughing at Mick Jagger, laughing at him. He's going, Mick, you don't need a book. This is the time when the Stones were getting into the black magic stuff and all of that. Yeah. So Don laughed at him. But you know what? Don was a hypocrite there, because he had gone to Manson, and Manson had turned him on to a book about how to control people. But Don has to be the big guy that the authority, and then so he can laugh at Mick Jagger for wanting to know, where do I go? What do I do from here? Can you give me any tips, Don?
Well, a genius is the person who's read the book that you haven't read.
That's right. That's right. That's a good one.
Wow, this is fascinating, Jeff Cotton. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this and being so open. History is history. I really feel that capturing it from the personal viewpoint is the only way. People remember things differently, but hey,
Yeah.
memory works differently, and also we don't really understand memory and how our memory is affected by traumatic experiences as much as we'd like to say we do. But I
That's
think
true.
at the end of the day, it's true that you were part of an incredible period of unbridled creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And, I want to say thank you, because it remains an inspiration to me and for all the Beefheart fans that listen to this podcast. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and it's a great pleasure. I've never held a grudge for what happened in those days. I never saw it that way. And I'm so grateful for that, because then I can be objective. And real quickly, if I can speak
Sure.
to what you had just mentioned about memory and that. My good close friend Randy Weimer, who's my drummer, puts it this way about people. You got what, 8 billion people on the earth, And it's like, here's a hub of a wheel of a bicycle, and there are 8 million spokes. Each one hits the ground in order, and they all have a unique perspective. You can't say that it's error, it's true from that perspective. So the more of those perspectives we get, and we have to be open-minded to do that, then the better off we are. The more we're going to understand life and how to get through this weird maze that we're living in, right?
100%. And as an historian, I really do believe that it helps us get through the present moment when we understand how many thousands of times these situations have recurred over history,
Mm-hmm.
over time. And so what do we make of that? Are we learning anything from it? I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if we are, but I
Yeah,
hope so.
I'm
Jeff.
sure we are, Greg. I'm sure we are. It's just the emotions of the time that make us think that we're not,
Mm,
that it's not, that we're not on the path. And unfortunately, a lot of times when we're in an emotion, we think it's forever, but it passes and then we get clarity again, right?
yeah. And also suffering is a teacher, and
So true.
certainly lack of suffering or being in a cushy place and
Uh-huh.
isolated can have some very bad effects as well on just the person and the people around them.
It's
Um,
true.
you know, Jeff, where can people find you on the internet and your music?
Thank you. If you go to jeffcottonmusic.us, that is my website. I apologize, there's not much there, but if you want to find everything I've done, you just Jeff Cotton musician, Google that. I do want to, thanks for asking. I want to mention that, we had the Maui fires, right?
Yes.
And it was much worse than what the media tells you. You don't believe the media. I do not believe the media. I did not believe the media in the 60s. That's how I got out of the draft. Had I believed the media, I would have gone in. So from that time on, I was aware to some degree. And those fires were all set on purpose to the moment. If you want me to go into a little detail on that, I can. Or if you want to do this another time, it's up to you.
Maybe another time, but
Yeah.
I don't put anything past anybody. So
Yeah.
I don't know what would be gained in that situation, but yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's important to, yeah. Quincy Jones once said to me, in order to know, you must go. So if you're someone that's living in that situation, you know a hell of a lot more about it than people who are
Yeah.
just flying in and putting a camera in front of it.
Yeah, I just like to say real quickly, the reason I brought up is because when you go on and Google me, I have 2 short videos about 7 minutes long where I spoke to my personal experience of the ignition within a quarter of a mile of where I lived.
Uh-huh.
So, and the 2 songs, one of them is called Lahaina because that was Lahaina that was burnt. And the other one is Where Are the Children? They're not Beefheart fan music. Uh, um, Where Are the Children is just a beautiful condolences to the parents that lost children that the media is not speaking of. Lahaina, I call it really what it was out front. So you'll hear those songs.
Jeff
But
Cotton
anyway,
Music.
yeah, Greg, I am so grateful that we could do this and that I'm honored to meet you and to be a part of this for your fans. Thank you very much.
Jeff, it's my honor and my privilege, and it's just been fun. And I hope we can do it again sometime. And I know there's a lot more we can talk about. So we'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Jeff Cotton. Thank you, everyone, for listening. As always, you can hit me on bendianmusic.com for discussion about this stuff. I always love to hear from people, always
Mm-hmm.
taking on new students. Also, hit us on Patreon. If you find this kind of content interesting, maybe throw us a couple of dollars this way and we'll keep things moving. as we head into our second 100 of interviews after 3 years. So once again,
Fantastic.
Jeff Cotton, you're the man. Thank you so much. See you, everybody.
Aloha.
Aloha.